Hello guys, you're welcome to another video on this channel. In this video I'm going to be giving you a Dart crash course, and we're going to be learning everything we need to be able to work comfortably with the Dart programming language. And the purpose of learning Dart is to be able to use it on the Flutter framework. So the first thing I want to do is to hop over to the Dart website so that I can show you how to install the Dart compiler so you can use that. So here is the Dart website and you can see it right here. So if you want to install the Dart programming language, there are actually two ways to do this. You can click on try Dart if you just want to use the Dart programming language and test the language without having to install it. So you can click on try Dart and you could run the code here and it's going to execute and run it, and you're going to see the results in the console here. So you could do that, or you could install the Dart compiler and you could run it offline on your computer. So if you click on install Dart or get Dart, then you're going to move to here where you could work with the Dart SDK. So if you're on Windows, Linux or Mac, then you could follow the instructions as you find here, and you're going to install the Dart SDK. However, I wouldn't recommend you install the Dart SDK. I would recommend you install the Flutter SDK because the Flutter SDK actually contains the Dart SDK. So hop over to flutter.dev and you should be able to find the Flutter SDK here. So this is the Flutter website. You can see it's flutter.dev, and so all you have to do is click on get started, and it's going to take you to instructions on how to set up Flutter on your platform. Here you can see that you can install Flutter for Windows, Mac, Linux, and Chrome OS. So if you're on Windows, you just click on Windows and follow the instructions to download and install the Flutter framework. So you can see here you just have to install the zip file, and you can follow the rest of the instructions to make sure that everything works as expected. What we have to do is to install the Flutter extension for Visual Studio Code. Now you could use Flutter for Visual Studio Code or Dart or Sublime Text, but Flutter is more supported in Visual Studio Code, so I would recommend that you install the Visual Studio Code extension for Flutter. So the next thing you have to do is to hop over to the extensions tab here and look for Flutter. So just type here, search for Flutter. I already have Flutter installed, and once you install Flutter, it's also going to install the Dart language support here. So once you have both installed, you are good to go and you can follow along with this crash course. So I'm just going to start now. Just click on File, Open Folder, so you can create a folder that we're going to use here. I have a folder here called Dart Tot, and so I'm going to click on this plus icon here to create a new file, and I'm going to call it main.dart. So Dart files always end with the .dart file extension here, the .dart extension. So when you open the main.dart file, the first thing we want to do is to create an hello world program. So that is what you create for every new programming language you learn. So the first thing I have to do to create an hello world program is I have this void main, and then open and closing curly braces, and inside of these curly braces I'm going to type print, and then I'm going to put a semicolon at the end, and inside of the parentheses I'm going to put single quotes right here, and I'm going to say hello world. Now make sure you save. Now when you save the program and you wait for a couple of minutes, you're going to find this run and debug button here, and this is going to allow you to be able to run your Dart code inside of Visual Studio Code. So I can click on run here and this is going to work. So if you click on the run button, you're going to wait for the compiler to compile your program, and you should get the result right here. So you can see we have hello world written down here. So let's get started with the crash course. So the first thing we want to do is to talk about variables. So variables are simply a way to store temporary data inside of the computer RAM. Okay, so if you want to reference some data that you want to use in your program and the data is temporary, then you store them inside of variables. So how do you declare variables in Dart? You declare variables by specifying a type, the identifier, and then you specify the value for that type. So for example, we have various fundamental data types inside of Dart. We have integers, we have floating point values, which is the double data type, we have string, and we have boolean. So the integer stores whole number, just integer values. The double stores floating point values, numbers that have decimal points in them. String stores sequence of characters. So if you have like a name or whatever, you get to store it in a string. And we have booleans, which just evaluates to true or false. So it stores values that are either true or false. So you can think of it like a yes or no kind of thing. So how do we declare variables of these types in Dart? The way to do it is simple. There are multiple ways to declare variables like this in Dart. The first I'm going to show you is using the var keyword. So you can think of the var serving as the type here, and then we need an identifier. So the identifier can be something like, for example, name, and then you see I have an equals here, and then I want to specify the value for my name. So I'm going to say that my name is Adebayo because that's my name. And the next thing I can do, so what can I do with this variable? So whenever I want to use this variable, I can use it anywhere in the program. So I could just do something like print name. And then if I save this and I click on run, you should see my name printed down here in the console. So there's another way to declare variables. So instead of specifying var and allowing the compiler to infer the type of this variable, you could also specify the type of the variable explicitly. So for example, this variable is of type string, so you specify string like that, okay? And you can see that if I decide to change the type of this variable to an invalid type, for example int, you see that we're going to get a compile error because it's going to say that the value of that string cannot be assigned to int. So that's why, so you can think of Dart as being type safe. Now that is the type safe version of Dart. There is also a type in Dart that allows you to store any kind of types, any type you want inside of your variable. So for example, you might want to store the dynamic type. So for example, I could say my dynamic, okay, and I want to store, for example, my name. And as you can see, this dynamic type can store anything, alright? You can store integers, you can store doubles, you can store strings, you can store booleans, you can store any object inside of a dynamic type. So you can think of this as the equivalent in JavaScript. So remember, JavaScript is a dynamically typed language, and if you want to use the dynamically typed functionality in Dart, then you can do that with the dynamic here just as well in Dart. So if I print this variable, for example, you can see that if I print my dynamic here, you're going to see that it's going to print Adebayo, but I can also assign the variable to another kind of value. So for example, I could say my dynamic is now going to point to 20, and it's still going to work. Okay, so if I do this and I run the program, you should get Adebayo and 20 right here, just like that. So that's the dynamic type. Now let's talk about modifiers. So we have modifiers in Dart, which allows us to specify how our variables can be accessed or used in our program. So say for example, I want to create a variable that once I assign a value to once, then I'm not going to be able to change it again. So we use what is called final for that. So final in Dart is we use final to reference it, or to create a variable that once you assign a value to, the value cannot be changed. So for example, I want to store a string name. I could store that as Adebayo again. And now if I try to store something else like Sam to name, you're gonna find out that this is not gonna work. Alright, it's going to tell you that the final variable name can only be set once. So once you set a value for this variable, then that's pretty much it. Alright, so that's that for the final keyword. And there's also constants. We also have constants. Now constants is kind of similar to final variables in that once you assign a value to a constant, the value cannot be changed. But constant values have to be initialized in place. So you cannot declare a variable and then try to assign a value to it later with constants. Constants have to be initialized and declared, and you can only initialize a constant value. You can only initialize a constant variable with a constant value. So you have to keep that in mind. So if you hover over this, you can see that it says constant variables can be assigned a value. Alright. So if you want to fix this, you can just remove the const keyword, but then this is not going to be constant anymore, and you can change the variable values however you want. So that's for constants. Now let's go to selection. So with selection, we're going to talk about if statements. So if statements are statements that allow you to conditionally invoke a block of code. So if you want to execute some code conditionally, so for example, I could have like var age equals 20, for example. So I could be like if age equals 20. All right. So what am I doing here? I'm creating this if statement. This is called an if statement, and I'm saying that if this value evaluates to true, whatever is inside of this parenthesis evaluates to true, then I want to execute whatever is inside of this block of code. All right, I want to execute this block. Now, if this does not evaluate to true, if this value is not true, in this case, I'm saying if age equals to 20, all right, I want to do something. So I want to print, for example, age is 20. All right, I didn't spell age correctly, so age is 20. Now, if I run this, you're gonna see that it's going to print age is 20. Why? Because age is actually 20 here. So you can see it prints age is 20. Now, if I change the age value to 21, for example, and I run this program, you can see that nothing gets printed on the screen here. It says exited, which means that this block of code is not evaluated because age is not 20. Now you can see these double equals are actually what is called comparison operators. All right, so we have double equals, which means equals. You can use it to test whether one value equals to the other. You can also use not equals, which is this exclamation mark and the equals, to test for whatever value is not equal to another value. And yeah, I feel like that's. We also have the greater than or equals, and we have the less than or equals, and we have the less than and the greater than. So this is just to say if this value is less than the other value, then it returns either true or false. So this is a Boolean condition. All right. So that's that. And there's also something else called if else. So for example, if age is not 20, I want to execute a code based on that. So I could have an else block right here. All right. So I could print something like age is not 20. All right. So what this is going to do is that it's going to evaluate this block, and if this block evaluates to true, it's going to run whatever is inside of this if block. But if that's not the case, then it's going to evaluate whatever is inside of the else block. All right. So it's either it's going to execute this block or it's going to execute this block. All right. So if we run this program, because age is 21, then we should get age is not 20, because age is 21 and 21 is not 20. So if you check that out, you're going to see that age is not 20, as you might expect. Now, what if we want to check if age is 30? All right, so we want to check if age is 20, we print age is 20. If we want to also check if age is 30, and then if age is not 30, then we want to say, you know what, we don't have a valid age. All right, so what we could do is what is called the else if. All right, so the else if works like this. After your if block, you have the else if. You create a new block called else if. And here, oh my god damn it, right. And here, you can now have another block of code. All right, so there's a parenthesis here. So you can see this looks similar to the if block here. But what this is going to do is it's going to evaluate this block, this expression here. If it doesn't evaluate to true, it's going to evaluate whatever is inside of this if block. So I could say if age equals 30 here. And now it's going to evaluate whatever is here. So I'm going to print age is 30. All right. And if this doesn't return true, if this doesn't evaluate to true, then it's going to, execute whatever is in the else block. Now you can choose to omit the else block, in which case it's not going to do anything and it's just going to continue with the program. But because we have an else block here, then we could do something like age is not valid. Alright, so now we could decide that age is 30 here, not 309, 30. And if I run the program, then we should get age is 30 as you might expect. Now let's talk about switch statements. Switch statements are statements that allow you to select between a predefined set of values. So for example, instead of having a lot of nested if and else if blocks, switch statements allow you to write selection and comparison in a much more readable manner. So for example, I want to have age, that example I gave before, so I could have like age equals 20. Now what I could do is specify a switch on the age variable, and now inside of here I will have to specify a bunch of cases. So for example, I could specify 20 and then I'll have a break at the end. Now I could specify 30 and a break at the end, and I could specify 40 with a break at the end, and I could keep specifying cases like that until I actually have enumerated the number of cases I want to handle for this variable. Alright, so in this case, if I have 20, I want to print, as you can see, I'm doing it inside of the break. Now if I forget to put a break inside of here, you can see that we have an error, and it says the case should not completed normally. Either we have a break or a return. So here we're going to put the break back inside of there, and now, so I want to print value or age is 20. Now because it's really difficult for me to type, I'm just going to copy this line, and in the 30 case I'm going to say age is 30, and in the 40 case I'm going to say age is 40. And in the default case, so the default case allow you to handle when the value is not any one of these. Alright, so for example, if age is something else that is not 20, 30 or 40, then the default case is going to run and we want to print age is not what we expect. So what is going to happen here is, if you run this program now, you're going to see that since age is 20, is going to execute this case. Alright, so you can see it executes age is 20. Now I want to do age is 22. Now we know we don't have the cases for, we don't have any of these cases here, so it's going to default to this default case, and it's going to print age is not what we expect, because we didn't specifically expect to have one of those cases here. And so if we run that, we're going to see that we're going to get age is not what we expect, just as we expect. Now let's talk about iteration. So what is iteration? Iteration simply means looping. I don't know if you've heard the word looping before, but looping is when you repeat some block of code. You repeat some statement. So what kind of iteration types do we have in Dart? We have the while loop. So what is while loop? While loop is simply saying execute this block of code while a condition is true. So for example, I could say, for example, I want to have a variable is hungry, and I say it's true. Alright, so I could have something like while is hungry, just like that. Now what is going to happen? This block of code is going to keep evaluating while this variable is true. Now interestingly enough, this variable is going to continue to be true throughout the lifetime of this program, because I am not changing the value of this variable. So for example, I could do something like I could have another variable just to track how many times I want to eat. So I'm going to have var count equals 0. So while I'm hungry, I want to eat. Alright, and then I want to increment count. So I could increment count by doing count plus plus, or I could increment count by doing count equals count plus 1. So it's equivalent. So the shortest way to do it is to just say count plus plus. So while I'm hungry, I want to eat. Now I want to say if count is greater than 10, then I'm going to say is hungry is false. So this is a case that allows me to break out of this while loop and say that, I am done with this. All right. And yeah. So if I run this, what do we get? We're going to see that this is going to repeat for a bunch of, I think about 10 times before it actually stops executing. So because I'm hungry, I eat, for how many times? So we probably want to know how many times we've eaten. So I'm gonna move this count up here, and then I'm gonna say eat count times. Now, something else I want to explain to you about Dart is it has something called string interpolation. So string interpolation is how you specify variables to be a part of a string. So for example, I have this count variable. Now I want the value of this variable to be part of this string here. So remember, I want to print this string to the console. So what Dart is going to do is it's going to interpolate this variable and put it as a value inside of this string. So to interpolate a variable in Dart, you use this $sign and then the variable name. So that's one thing you should take into account, and you make sure you remember that. So yeah, anyway. So if I run this now, you're going to see that I'm going to eat, I think about 1 to, 10 times. So, okay, I actually ate 11 times. So you can see eat 1 time, 2 times to 11 times, and that's pretty much it. So now we've talked about while loops. So let's talk about do while loops. So do while loops are loops that allow you to execute at least once before checking for the case. So for example here, I could say is hungry is false. Now I want to do this while is hungry. Alright, so what this means is that I want to execute this block of code while this variable evaluates to true. Alright, so if I print eat, for example, you're going to find out that what is going to happen is that this is going to execute this code once, and then it's going to break out of this loop. Why is that? Because do while loops execute a block of code at least once before checking for, the condition. So that's pretty much, as you can see, we have eat at least once inside of the program. So that's that for do while loops. So now let's talk about for loops. So this is how you create for loops in Dart. So you're gonna have something like for loop for var I equals 0, I is less than 20, I plus plus. So this is what a for loop looks like in Dart. I'm gonna print, for example, I. So what is this? So this is saying that while I want to declare a variable here, so for loops can be broken down into 3. We have what is called the initialization, condition, and increment. So what happens inside of this for loop is I'm initializing this variable, and then I'm specifying a condition for this loop to keep running. So this means that the variable, this is going to be the beginning. The first time we enter this for loop, we're going to initialize this variable I to 0. Now it's going to have a while loop that says while I is less than 20, execute this block of code, and once this block of code is done executing, increment this value. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about for loop. Now if you run this, you should get your expected output right here. You can see that it actually executes this from 0 to 19 as you might expect. So variable I is 0, so it prints I to the screen. Then it comes to evaluate this and says while I is less than 20, which is going to be true until I becomes 19, and it increments I right after executing that block of code. So that's all about for loop. Now let's talk about functions in Dart. So if you look at the main function here, this is actually what is called a function. So a function is what allows you to encapsulate some piece of logic. So for example, you might need a function to actually do something. Alright, so for example, I want to do something like void print name. Now this function, the function's name is to actually print something out to the screen. Alright, so print my name out to the screen. So what I could do is to just do something like Adebayo. So I've just created a function that does just that allows me to print a name. And in order to use that function, what I can do is to call print name here, just as you might expect. All right. I didn't type that correctly. You can print a function like that, and so you can click on run, and it's going to print my name right here, as you can see. So that's how you create a function in Dart. Now, that's not all. By the way, this is not the best practice to actually, this is, you create function using camel cases, all right? So make sure you remember that. So let's talk about function and its arguments. So a function can take arguments. So for example, I want this function, this print name function, to actually print a specific kind of name that is not my name. So I wanted to print any kind of name. So the way to create arguments is you specify the type of the argument and the identifier for the argument. So for example, I could have something like the name you want me to print, right? And then I can just come here and substitute my name with the name variable here. So here what is going to happen is it's going to print whatever, it's going to take whatever value you pass into it, and it's going to use it inside of the function. So you can see there's an error here, and it says one positional argument expected. All right, good. So let's just do that. So in order to print a name, we're going to specify any name we want here. So I could specify my name here, I could specify Sam or whatever, and it's going to work. So if I click on run, you should be able to see Sam printed out to the console right here. And that's pretty much it. Now, there's also another kind of argument that I want to show you. This is another kind of argument that you can pass to functions. Now, they're called optional or named arguments. So for example, as you can see, there's an error here. It says too many positional arguments. All right. So there are positional arguments and there are named arguments. So this is a positional argument and this is a named argument. So a named argument is where you start with these curly braces to open and the curly brace to close. So as you can see, there's an error here. It says can't have a value of null because blah 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 blah. So types in Dart are not null by default. All right. So if you want to make a type null in Dart, you have to put the question mark. All right. So because this type is not null, we have to provide a default value. All right. So I can do something like Adebayo, and as you can see, I just gave it the default value. So what I can do here now is I can call print name without specifying any argument, and if I run this, you're going to see that it's going to print my name, which is Adebayo. Now, what if I want this to print something else? What I could do is simple. I just have to specify name here, and I can say something like Sam. And if I run the program, you're going to see that it's going to execute this, and it's going to use Sam instead of Adebayo, as you can see right here. So that's pretty much it about positional arguments. Now, take for example, I want to use a positional argument. I don't want to specify a default value. I don't want to use a positional argument. I don't want to specify a default value, but I want to use it to always specify it like this because this just looks more readable. So you could do that by just having required here. Now required excuse me, required allows you to say that you want named arguments and you also want some values to be required. So for example, here you can now see that name is required. And if I take this off, if I delete this, you're going to see that we're going to get an error that's going to say that name parameter name is required. All right. So if I put that back, the error goes away and you can run the program. Of course, I could specify other things like age, where I could do something like int age. I could make this optional. I could make this nullable, and then I could do something like name, and then with the age variable, just like that. And if I run the program now, because age does not have any value assigned to it, then it's going to become null. As you can see, Sam equals to null. But we could specify a value for age now, and we could do something like 30. And so it means that Sam is actually 30 years of age. As you can see, it's being printed right here. So that's all you need to know about arguments inside of Dart, positional and named arguments. Now let's talk about return types. So a function can return a value. So for example, we could have a function that, I'm going to delete all of this. So we could have a function that takes argument and returns a value. So let's say we want to make a function that takes in two numbers and returns the result. So we're going to do something like int add, int a, int b. And so this is how you declare a function that returns a value. You specify the return type. Initially we had void as a return type. Void simply means that the function does not return any result. But in this case we have int as the return type. So it means that the function is going to return an integer. Alright, so you can see we have this long error description that says that, long story short, we need to specify a return value for this function. So the way to do it is really simple. We just say return a plus b in this case. So we evaluate whatever we want to do and we return that particular result. Alright, so if I print, so I could do print add, and I want to print add a and b, so we could do something like 20 and 30. And now if I run this, you should get 50 as you might expect. So there we go, we have 50 as the result. And that's pretty much it about return value. So in Dart you can return anything you want, an object, a primitive, it doesn't really matter. As long as it's a valid type in Dart, you should be able to return it. Alright. Now let's talk about classes. So what are classes? Classes is another way to encapsulate code. So classes allow you to have members and methods. So methods are just simply functions. I'm just going to show you what I'm talking about here. So I want to create a class that is a number. Alright, so I have this number class. As you can see, I just have class keyword followed by the name of the class, which is number. Names usually start with uppercase and is I think it's called Pascal case in general. So you have Pascal case for defining or declaring your class types. So classes have fields. So what are fields? Fields are simply members of a class. So they are members that you can specify inside of your class. Now for fields, we could have, for example, we could have like a string, not a string, yeah, I could say string type, for example, and then int value. Actually, I'm going to use num value here. And as you can see, we have an error for these members. It's going to say that non-nullable instant field, blah, 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 must be initialized. So I want to say here that the type of my number is an int, for example, and the value is 20. Alright. Now, as you can see, I'm using this type here that I didn't specify earlier. Now, this is what is called a super type. This is a super class for the int and the double type inside of Dart. So if you have anywhere you find a non-variable, you can see it says it's an integer or floating point number. Alright. So that's one thing you should realize. Now, as you can see, when I declare this field, I specified default values for them. Alright. I could also specify, just as before, I could specify final member variables or fields, and I could specify const fields. It doesn't really matter. Alright, it's gonna work. So it says only static fields can be declared as const. So you can see that you can only declare or define static fields as const inside of classes. Now we're going to talk about getters inside of Dart. But before we talk about getters, let's talk about private. So I'm going to show you how to instantiate this variable inside of our main function. So let's say I want to do let final number. So I'm going to say number like this. Alright, so this is how you are going to instantiate a variable. Now there are two ways you could specify a number like this, or you could specify a new number with a new keyword. This is less used, so you can just do this. Alright, and this will create a number for you, and you can print the number, the type, for example. And this is going to work as you might expect. And something else I want to show you, so you can see it prints int here. Now something else I want to show you is that this variable can actually be private here by using this underscore keyword. Now here I can specify number dot underscore type here, and it's still gonna work as you might expect. But if you want to make, like, there's no concept of private variables or protected variables inside of Dart. But if you want to make this variable private, you're gonna have to save it inside of a new file. So for example, number.dart, and then I'm going to have to move this class inside of here. If I could do that, I'm gonna have to move this class inside of here. And now, of course, we're gonna get an error because it doesn't know where the class is. But if you hover over this error, you're gonna be able to just click on quick fix and import library number.dart. So this is how you import stuff inside of Dart. So you just see I just imported the number.dart here, and the error goes away. But now I cannot access the type anymore because it says blah 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 blah. It says it couldn't find the type. Alright, it's not gonna be able to find the type because it's private. As you can see, if I want to specify value, I should be able to do that without any issue, just as you might expect. But any variable field or method that starts with underscore inside of another file, then you're not going to be able to access it inside of wherever you're importing that file. So to fix this, we could use getters. So to specify getters, you just do something like string get, and then you could do something like type, and then you specify type right here. Now, what is this arrow notation that I just wrote here? The arrow notation is what is called a shorthand notation for returning a value. So if you want to return just a value, just use this arrow notation, and then you specify whatever you want to return. So you're going to see this a lot in Dart. And so what this means now is that instead of specifying underscore type here, I could specify this like this. Alright, so this is what is called a getter. Now, what is the usefulness of using getters here? Now, remember that I have number the value being 20. So, for example, I could print number the value here, but I could also change the variable's value. So I could do number the value value equals 21, for example. And it's actually a valid thing to do. So if I run this, you're gonna see that it's gonna print 20, then it's gonna print 21, and then of course it's going to print the numbers type. So if you don't want a user to be able to change your the types variables value, so you could do this. Now if I try to change the numbers type, for example, so something like maybe string, you're gonna see that it's not gonna work. It's gonna say that there's not a setter name type, and so it's not gonna work. Alright, so that's one thing you should take. Now let's talk about setters. Now of course you can see that we could specify a getter like this. Now let's talk about how to define a setter. Alright, so for example, we might want to be able to change the type of this number to either int or double, but we don't want any other type. Alright, if we allow this to be public, then we're going to have a problem because we're not going to be able to control whatever value is passed inside of here. But we could do much better by doing something like by creating a setter that allows us to control what value is passed inside of this variable. So how do we do that? We use what is called set. Alright, so we're going to do something like set type, and then we're going to specify the type we want to set. So we're going to do string type. And of course, we can use the arrow notation, or we could use the function notation. It doesn't matter. In this case, we're going to use the function notation because we have to do a couple of things. Alright, so we're going to do something like if type equals to int, or type equals to double, then we're going to say type equals type equals to this type right here. So we're saying that our field's value equals to whatever is here. So this is actually a good way to make sure that you validate whatever value is passed into your stuff. So to do this now, you're gonna see that we can now try to set this. So I'm gonna print, as I've printed numbers type here, I'm gonna make sure I copy and paste this. And now I want to do number.type equals to something like rubbish, for example. Now you're gonna see that this is not gonna work. Alright? You see we don't have an error because I've defined a setter for this value here. But if I try to run this and I try to assign rubbish to this type, you're gonna see that we're not gonna get rubbish. Instead, we're gonna get the same type int, just as you might expect, because we are now validating the data that is being passed to our setter right here. So that is a very, very good use of setters inside of Dart, and you can do that, as much as you want. The next thing we want to talk about is extensions. So what are extensions? Extensions are functions that you can define on an existing type. So for example, if I want to extend the string type, for example, so let me say that I have a file. So let's say that I have a path or a file name. Alright, so the file name is something like my song .mp3. Now say I want to get the extension of this file. Alright, now I could write a function that allows me to get the extension, but it's much better to define an extension that allows me to just define that to get the extension, the file name extension from the string type itself. So how do we do that? Well, the way to do that is really simple. You have the extension keyword, so you do extension on. So you have to specify what kind of variable you want to define the extension on. So I'm going to say extension on string, for example. So this, I want to define extension on string. So what do I want to define on string? I want to do the string get extension. Okay, let's just do ext, alright, because I want to get the extension of this file name. So we're gonna do string get ext. So how do we do that? So how do we get the extension of this file? Well, we're gonna use what is called the substring. Alright, we're gonna use the substring function, and where do we want to start from? We want to start from wherever the index. So we're gonna use the index of. Alright, we're gonna use the index of this dot, and I think let me make sure I have the parentheses right. Right, so we want to use the index of this dot plus 1. Alright, I think this is correct. Yeah, so what I'm trying to do here is to get this mp3. So we're gonna get the index of this dot, which is this. But there's a problem. What if I have this kind of file where I have my prefix dot? So this is not going to be correct because we're going to be printing out my song.mp3, which is not the correct extension. So how do we fix this? We use last index of. Alright, so we use last index of like that. So what this means is that when it finds this first dot, it's going to move to the next until it gets to the last index of dot, and that should be the extension of our file. Now, of course, there is another problem that I'm going to leave for you to fix. Now, what if the file does not contain an extension? That's one thing you should take into account. Then this time you should make the string nullable, and then you have to check for the index, and if it returns -1, then you should probably return the null value to say that extension is not found for this particular file name. But I'm going to leave that as an exercise for you to do it yourself. You could just try it out to make sure that you have an understanding of the of the language and strings in general. So now if I want to do this, I can now print my extension is, I want to show you something else that I haven't showed you before. So I could do something like file name.x, just like that. Now if you take a look at that, you can see that that actually works now. So, but you can see that before, earlier I told you that you can use the $sign and then you specify the variable type. Now if you want to call like a function, or you want to do some stuff that is not just a single value, then you have to use this opening and closing brace inside. So if you want to have like an expression or whatever inside of the interpolated string, then you're gonna have to do it with this syntax here. So a $sign, an open curly brace, and a closing brace to end it. So that is that with for extension. So you can define as many functions as you want on this. Now also you can name your extensions. Alright, so you can do something like my x, or you can do something like my string x, for example. Now why do we want to name our extension? So if I move this extension to another file, so for example, if I move this extension to number, so I'm just going to write it down here. you can see that we can still access the extension here. But if I remove the name of this extension, you're going to find out that I cannot access it here anymore because this is implicitly private. Alright, so that's why you should name your extensions if you want to use it in multiple different places. So all you just have to do is import the file, which is the number.dart, and you'll be able to access your extensions wherever you want. So let's talk about mixins. So what are mixins? Mixins simply contain types that you can use to like extend classes, except they already provide all the functionality that you might need inside of the class. So what am I trying to say here? This is what a mixin looks like in Dart. So you have mixin keyword, and then you have the name of the mixin. So for example, I could do something like my mixin, and then you could have like a void mixin function, alright, and then I could print my mixin function. And now, how do we use this mixin? We'll create a class, alright, so I can say my class, and then I use the with keyword with my mixin. And what does this mean? This means that my class is now going to have all of these mixins values, and I could use it as I might expect. So I could do something like my class dot mixin func. As you can see, I can actually use that. So I'm creating an instance of this class and I'm calling the mixin function. And if I run it, you're gonna see that I will be able to specify the mixin function here. So that's one thing about mixin. But I could also override the mixin function, as you can see here. So I could do something else, like for example, print my own custom input. So what is this going to do? Now the super.mixin function is going to call this mixin func, as you might expect, but it's also going to say my own custom mixin, my own custom implementation for this mixin function. I'm just going to show you guys what I'm trying to say here by running this. And you should get these two printed out, as you might expect. So you can see my mixin function gets executed, and then my own custom implementation gets taken into account. So mixins are really useful in a variety of use cases. So you should definitely check them out. So now let's talk about lists. So what are lists? Lists are simply a collection of related kind of data. Alright, so if you want to store a collection of data inside of Dart, you are going to be using lists. So how do you create a list? I'm going to show you an example here. So we're going to say final artist equal to, then you're going to see an opening square brace, followed by an enclosing square brace and a semicolon at the end. And then you're going to have, for example, Eminem, Michael Jackson, Owl City. So now, if you hover over this, you're gonna see that we have a list of string. So that's the annotated type. That's the inferred type that the compiler gets us. All right. You can also replace that with a list of string just like that, and that'll work just as you might expect. And of course, you could print out the list just to see what that gives us. So you can see that I print Eminem, Michael Jackson, and Owl City, as you might expect. And also we could add something to the list, for example. So here we're going to add Skylar Grey as a new artist inside of the list, and then we're going to copy and paste the list, the print statement again. And now if I click on run, you should see Skylar Grey appended to the list, just as you might expect. Also, we could remove items from a list. So for example, let's say we wanted to remove the first element, which is Eminem, from the list. So we could do artist.remove, and then we're going to type the object, the element we want to remove, which is Eminem. So we could type that. And we could also remove something via index. So if we want to remove an element via index from the list, we could also do artist.remove at and the index 0, and that's going to work as you might expect. So that's all about lists. Now let's talk about set inside of Dart. So a set is actually like a list of data, a list of similar types inside of Dart, except the set of data inside of what you store inside of a set in Dart is unique types, unique values actually. So which means that your types cannot contain duplicates of the same kind of value. So if we have like a set of data, a set of values inside of our set, we cannot add elements that are that has the same value inside of our set. So I'm going to show you an example right now. So I'm going to create a set of artists again, and here I'm going to have Eminem, Michael Jackson, if I can spell that right. And then I'm also going to have Owl City again, and I'm going to have Rihanna. And now, so this set only contains unique elements. And now I can print out the artist so you see what gets printed out on the screen. And now I want to add an element to the set. And now if I type Eminem, because Eminem is already being included inside of the set, if I print this out, I should get the same values inside of there, and the add should not actually happen. So which means it's going to ignore duplicate elements. So if you check that, you see that Eminem is not duplicated inside of the set, and it's just as you might expect. So set is useful in a variety of scenarios. Now the next thing I want to talk about is maps. So maps are key value stores. So in Dart, you store maps as key values, similar to the way you write JSON code inside of JavaScript. So I'm going to give you an example here. So say we say find songs, and then we have this opening and closing curly brace. And then we have the key, which is going to be Eminem here, and the value of the key is going to be lose yourself. As you can see, they're delimited using the colon, and then you have the value. So next we're gonna have Rihanna, and then we're gonna have Man Down as the title. And now we can reference the value from the songs map by using the key. So if we wanted to get the 0th element, we're gonna just do songs, and then the subscript operator, and then the value Eminem we're gonna pass inside of there. And now if we print the 0th element, you're gonna see that we're gonna get Eminem, as you might expect. So that is how you use maps inside of Dart. We're gonna wait for the print to happen. So you're gonna see that. What do we get? We get lose your. Okay. Next, we want to talk about futures. So what are futures? Futures in Dart are a way to write asynchronous code. So if you want to write asynchronous code that is going to return a result at a later time, and the result is not going to be instantaneous, then you use future for that. So if you have some sort of CPU intensive operation like network calls, IO operations, basically tasks that you're going to perform that is not going to return results instantly, and that is what you use a future for in Dart. So how do I create a future here? I'm going to show you an example. I'm going to have a future, and then I'm going to have this opening and closing angle brackets, and then you're going to put void inside because our future is not going to return anything. So if your future returns a value, you're going to pass something inside. You're going to put the type of the value your future want to return instead of using void. So here I have a function called doLater, and I'm going to annotate this function with the async keyword. So what the async keyword lets us do here is that it allows us to return an actual value instead of using the future type. So you can think of the async function as a way, as a syntactic sugar. All right. So I'm going to show you what it desugars to later, but you can think of the async function, the async keyword, as a syntactic sugar that allows us to just return a value and write synchronous code, in an asynchronous context. So in this case, when you have a function that returns a future, you're actually writing asynchronous code. but in this case it's going to be handled as if the code is actually synchronous. So here I just want to print do later, and then I'm going to put a semicolon. I'm going to go to my main function, and so what I want to do in my main function is to change the signature. So I'm going to make my main function return a future. I'm going to annotate it with async, and now what I want to do is call await on the do later. So you might not have seen the await keyword yet, but what the await keyword does is that it allows us to, or it helps us wait for the result of a future. So if you're inside of a function, an asynchronous function, for example, a function that returns a future, then and is also annotated with the async keyword, then you can use an await keyword to actually wait for the result of an asynchronous function that you call inside of Dart. In this case, we call do later, and we're able to use the await keyword because the main function here has been changed to return a future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to print something here that says doing before, and then I'm going to print something that says after do later. And now I'm going to run the project, and you can see what it prints out. You can see that it waits for the do later function to complete, and then it prints after do later. So what I can do, if I want my code to continue running before I actually wait for my future, is I could get a reference to the future, and by doing final future equals do later, and then at the end of my function I'm going to await the future. So what is going to happen is that what I want to happen is I want the function to continue to execute, and then at the end of the function I want to await this future if it hasn't already completed. Alright, so the next thing we have to do for this to work properly is we have to modify the do later function. What we're going to do is we're going to use a future to reschedule this so that it actually runs in the next iteration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my do later function. I'm going to remove the async keyword, and then what I'm going to do now is to return a future.micro task right here. Now what the future micro task does, it actually puts this task inside of the Dart event queue. So the Dart event queue is what executes every loop. So it's going to put the micro task inside of the Dart event queue, and then it's going to be, so when the event gets handled, this is going to print it done later. So now I'm going to put the done later function, the print statement, done later print statement inside of that function, and then I'm going to run again, and now you're going to see that this is actually going to execute everything else, and then at the end is going to await the future, which is going to print done later because the future was handled much later in the program. Now that will be all for this crash course. Thank you guys for watching. There is definitely still more to learn in this programming language called Dart, and I recommend you check out the official resourcing guide at dart.dev if you want to learn more. There's some things I didn't cover in this crash course because some of them are actually advanced or less used. For example, you might want to know about streams. You could check that out in dart.dev. And yeah, that will be pretty much it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.